Hi, I'm Megan. Welcome to today's live reading of The Scent of Snow by Giovanna Siniscalchi, presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Join me. Chapter 1, North of Portugal, Calderia, Almoster, December 1874. Pedro lifted his head from his correspondence as sunlight flooded the study, casting a warm glow on the goblin carpet. Despite the drop in temperature, the sky was a deep blue, a hallmark of Portugal. Anne would be disappointed. His wife hoped for snow to grace her Christmas celebration. Anne's wishes fell into two categories, those Pedro could marshal into line and those beyond his command. The weather couldn't be coerced, but all else stood at attention, ready to serve his will. Perhaps he would fulfill her desires right now. His lips tugged up as an image of Anne innocently embroidering in her morning room graced his mind, and all the wicked things he could do with the soft cashmere thread he had bought her from Scotland. He was about to stand when, among the elegant parchments and neatly penned notes atop his desk, a letter stood out, a scrawled message on cheap paper. He scanned the lines and leaned back in the chair. His heart rate quickened, and a thrill resonated in his bones. Since Fernando's death, claims that the royal duke was alive had poured in daily. He dismissed them as the utter rubbish they were. The king's brother, Pedro's best friend, had been butchered by a slave trader 18 months before. Still, Pedro's instinct told him there was something different this time, and his instinct never failed. He could go to Paris himself to check, but the new republic could object to his presence. His royalist convictions were common knowledge. The secretary knocked at his study's door. "You have a visitor, Your Excellency." Expecting his brother-in-law and his best friend tomorrow, and his brother Chris the following day, Pedro was surprised. His hand instinctively sought his concealed short sword under the desk. The secretary opened the door, admitting Diomedes de Vega, Marquis of Fial. Pedro stifled his irritation at the unannounced presence. The Christmas gathering was for family. The country's top diplomat's son greeted Pedro with a hesitant smile, his complexion flushed from the chill. Releasing the sword, Pedro crossed his legs and observed Diomedes closely. His striking looks and effortless navigation of high society and underworld alike were well known. Yet Diomedes was more than just a charming aristocrat. His composure under pressure in Spain the previous year had proven that. For a man of action, trust didn't come from years of stilted relationships, but from the split second it took for a bullet to catch a man's rear guard. There were 6 men Pedro counted on to watch. There were 6 men Pedro counted on to watch his flank. He might not enjoy his brother-in-law's arrogance or how Enrique spent his cerebral advantage, but he could depend on each to guard his back. Dante, his aide-de-camp, or his aide-de-camp, he trusted implicitly. His brother had been his second for all his military career, and Gabriel, his cousin, had regained his trust. The 6th one was dead. Or not. Either way, it was time to expand the circle. Pedro caressed his goatee as the idea solidified. Diomedes was the perfect choice to investigate the letter. He might refuse, but all men had a price. Pedro rose to greet his guest. Diomedes carried a vase, no doubt a present for Anne. Seemingly relieved to relinquish the burden, he placed it atop Pedro's desk. Pedro squeezed the other man's hand and nodded in appreciation as Diomedes returned the pressure. "I thought you were visiting the Duke of Palamela in London," Pedro said, moving the liquor tray. After pouring 2 port crystals, he offered one for Diomedes and leaned his hip over the windowsill. "How old is the fox?" Deo accepted the wine and averted his eyes. "Father sends his regards. He was grudgingly impressed by how you dealt with the port prices dispute. You know how he can be an excellent trait in a diplomat, for sure." "Of course." After taking a swig, Diomedes nodded and pointed his glass at the window. "You have quite the fortress here. I couldn't help but notice the bridge, a poetic construction." "That's the Massalia. It looks ancient. How is it even standing? It seems to defy gravity." Pedro chuckled. In all his 31 years, he'd never considered the bridge's structure. A legend speaks of the castle's lord striking a dark bargain with the devil to erect it. When the devil gives his word, he never breaks it. Pedro tasted the port, his eyes traveling the stretches of rocks. the stretch of rocks as it crossed the river's turbulent waters like the devil's finger. When Pedro first created the Lusitanos stud property, he valued the bridge for making it impregnable. Now, with no threats dusting the horizon, he appreciated it for a different reason. It kept everything he loved inside and protected from outside changes. Happiness, such as what Anne brought into his life, was ephemeral. How many in his path had to heed heaven's call, some even by his own hands. Ice coursed through his veins, turning the muscles on his neck and shoulders as rigid as the granite slabs of the bridge. Pedro swallowed the port and exhaled slowly, breathing out through his mouth. Anne wasn't going anywhere. By St. George, she loved him, and though he stopped questioning his blessings, he would battle anything keen to change their relationship. Her love was a delicate meadow bathed in the glow of dawn. A beautiful, impossible to defend meadow, vulnerable, exposed. To protect it, he had constructed a glass dome around it. Within this dome, Anne remained untouched, their happiness preserved. Every hazard, every shadow of doubt was kept at bay. Pedro would protect their love by any means necessary. He forced himself to look beyond the bridge to the road leading to the forest. No enemies lurked there. He was in control of his fate. If the devil built it, it sure is a monument to its craftiness, and wherever he is, he must be at peace for a job well done, Diomedes said, his voice uncharacteristically solemn. Pedro paused, tilted his head. Did Viega crave recognition? Indeed impressive enough to leave a mark. Perhaps this was his price. That sort of peace isn't exclusive for mythological beings. Mortals can aspire to greatness as well. Pedro watched the other man closely. I have no doubt of it, Diomedes said, and his eyes stayed straight to the urn. I have a deep respect for the Portuguese heroes, enough to become one. Diomedes choked and loosened his cravat. What? No, of course not. I'm here to... Your arrival was fate's doing. The country needs you. You will go to Paris. Fate? Paris? Diomedes shook his head repeatedly and lifted both his palms. Christ, that's not why I came. Palmela will own me forever. You see, Almoster, your father, is dead. Pedro stilled. Diomedes' words fractured their meaning, slipping away like sand through fingers. His voice transformed into a drone mingling with the thumping of Pedro's heart. As he struggled with the sounds, colors drained from his surroundings, leaving everything in a monochromatic haze. The room, once vibrant, now appeared as if viewed through a veil of gray. The other man placed his hand above his shoulder. Are you all right? Pedro jerked away from the touch. No one touched him except Anne. I'm sorry for my wretched sensibility. Palmela sent me to impart the news. Your father died a hero and will always be deeply admired. Those are his ashes. And here. He fumbled with his coat and took an envelope. The Duke of Titano left you this. The words father and Titano reverberated through him with the force of a knell. He stared at Diomedes' outstretched offer and then at the vase. He wanted nothing to do with either. Still, his hand caught the envelope of its own twisted will. Pedro's fingers tightened around it, crumpling its edges. His eyes drifted to where the portrait of his father used to hang on the wall, and he pictured the old Duke's stern countenance. The Duke's gaze pierced through him just as they had during their lessons. Never good enough, never. Pedro clung to those memories, the hatred. Father was dead and would take the violence with him to the grave. Other memories crawled from the recesses of his mind, a faint smile on the Duke's lips, a proud father's nod, a shared jest, a pat on the back. Another memory, this one older, took shape, an embrace on a Christmas night, tears. Pedro's chest heaved, lost between a sob and a sigh. What am I saying? Diomedes brushed his forehead. You are the Duke of Titano now. Long live the Duke. Chapter 2. The luminarius arrived at last. Anne picked up the box, her excitement so high she wanted to scream. Her maid extended her hand. Let me help you carry it. Where do you plan to do so? Atop my goddaughter? I don't think so. Beatrice caressed her pregnant belly. Indeed, I can't seem to hold more than this little package nowadays. Together, they crossed the corridors to Anne's private morning room. All of Pedro's properties, the fortress was where she felt less at ease. This wasn't the house itself, with its grand foyer and cold stone walls that no plush carpet could soften. She couldn't blame the bridge's infamous builder or the treacherous scarps of behind the property, and not even the stern housekeeper who treated her like a child. It was the sound of the river in winter. The perpetual hum spoke to her in ways she couldn't explain. Whenever Anne crossed or gazed at the Mesarella Bridge, she sensed an unexplained melancholy. Sometimes she heard whispers or felt an icy touch on her skin. Daydreaming again, Beatrice touched her shoulder. Anne forced a smile. Here she was, being fanciful and attaching human feelings to stones and water and landscape. Murmuring river or not, this was Pedro's favorite property, and she would make a brilliant Christmas for him, even if it killed her. How else would she convince him that it was time to start a family? They had been married for 2.5 years now, and whenever she spoke about pregnancy, he evaded her, telling her she was only 20 years old. Granted, after their unconventional courtship, if one could call escaping a conspiracy abroad a yacht and running away from a slave trader a courtship, their married life entered a whirlwind of social activities and travels. Pedro owned estates in several countries and wanted to introduce his countess to each. She didn't mind it, not when he liked to christen all the bedchambers by making love to her. A sigh escaped her chest, and when Beatrice gave her a strange look, Anne cleared her throat. They entered the morning room. Pedro had redecorated it for her as a birthday surprise. She couldn't have reflected her personality so well if she had chosen the details herself. Bathed in natural light from tall arched windows, the room offered a stunning view of the estate gardens. Delicate frescoes adorned the high ceilings. The drapery and the Persian rug combined light pink and cream tones to create comfortable harmony. Beatrice plopped her weight onto the rocking chair, knitting in hand. Anne settled on the rose chaise lounge and opened the box. Inside were the results of her charity project. The luminarias, Portuguese paper lanterns, were the loveliest Portuguese Christmas tradition. With Isabel, the Duchess of Brinzaga, Anne had created a sanctuary for less privileged women to learn various crafts, gaining independence and financial stability. The luminarias was their first financial success. I can't believe those pompous ladies from the court refused to buy these beauties. Beatrice scrunched her face. The problem wasn't with the lanterns or the hands of the impoverished artisans that made them. It was with Anne. No prestigious lady in Portugal dared to mistreat her before Pedro, but that didn't mean they accepted her, an English lady with a shady past in their midst. Still, to the bourgeoisie class, she was a heroine, as her family came from trade, and she had married into the most illustrious aristocratic line in Portugal. They supported her charity, and her luminarias had sold out before Christmas. Amidst the soft rustle of paper, Anne unveiled a lantern from its wrappings. With or without their help, what matters is that all those women will bring extra income to fill their pantries this winter, and several Lisbon houses will get a special glow this Christmas. She traced the little angels cut She traced the little angels cut out of the edges. What an enchanting play of light and shadows they will produce once the candle was lit. The Count's mother decorated the house with luminarias. Beatrice giggled. Hard to see your brooding husband playing with paper lanterns. Anne pitied those who only knew Pedro as the most powerful man in Portugal. To her, he was company and silence, laughter and heat, tickles and sighs. He was sun and sunset, darkness and light, calm and storm, fire and ice. Her first breath in the morning and her yawn in the night, her sustenance, her heartbeat, her life. The image of a baby with Pedro's golden hair flirted in her mind, and a wave of longing unfurled in her chest. How would it be to carry a little being under her heart for 9 months? Not that she envied her maid, quite the contrary. Anne cheered for her, but sometimes she wondered if she would ever experience the same joy. Anne shook away the gloom. Of course she would. Laughing, she threw a pillow at Beatrice. Pedro isn't brooding. He's just serious and concerned with, well, everything. Pedro carried the weight of the monarchy, his tenants and properties, but she made him happy. She was absolutely positive about it. The housekeeper entered the morning room, her white hair pulled back in a flawless bun. More ancient than old, she resembled a classical statue or piece of furniture. Her family had worked at the fortress for generations. Cold and efficient, she looked at Anne as if she were a meddling child. A tiny voice in her head whispered that's what she was. Too inexperienced and gauche to be the woman of a politician of Pedro's caliber. Anne silenced the insecurity, Pedro had chosen her, not some blue-blooded heiress. Anne made him happy, and no other could touch him.